She didn't see herself as a victim. She saw herself as a sinner.
And it haunts you, it changes you, and I wish I could go back, but I can't. But I will do it now. Just, yeah. And you know, yeah, it's almost like, I'm so sorry. It's something that will never ever leave you, and you can't take it. You can't. Well, in those moments, you think, I can't do this. I can't do this. You don't have a baby, and you choose death. You choose to murder. You don't think of it as murder, but it's so I call it what it is.
It was clear that she regretted having had an abortion and that this was a really pivotal moment in her life story. And she really believes what her church teaches.
We are returning from our evening session for August 23rd, 2022. The board held its open session beginning at 3 o'clock today, followed by several work sessions and a closed session up on the third floor. I will make a motion to certify our closed session. In the closed session that was just concluded, nothing was discussed except the matter which was identified in the motion to convene in closed session. Only those matters lawfully permitted to be discussed under the Freedom of Information Act were discussed. I make that motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
Madam Clerk.
Mr. Peters?
Yes.
Mrs. Hooker?
Yes.
Mr. North?
Here.
Mr. Radford?
Yes.
Mr. Mahoney?
Yes. Item O1 on our agenda is a public hearing and a second reading of ordinances. Number one is a petition of Insight Real Estate Investment Properties, LLC, to rezone approximately 0.93 acre from R2 Medium Density Residential District to C2 High Intensity Commercial District to construct a drive-in or fast food restaurant, parens, quick serve coffee shop, close parens, located at 7515 and 7517 Friendship Lane, Hollins Magisterial District. Mr. Thompson.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. Tonight's request is a rezoning for the construction of a drive-in and fast food restaurant, mainly a quick serve coffee shop. The site is located at the corner of Plantation Road and Friendship Lane. It entails 3 parcels. They total up to 0.93 acre. The address is 7515 and 7517 Friendship Lane. Currently, there is a single-family home on the one parcel, and the other 2 parcels are vacant. Again, it is a proposed drive-in and fast food restaurant for a quick-serve coffee shop. A couple of photographs to get you acquainted with the site. You kind of see the map and gives you the orientation of the photo. So this is kind of looking down Plantation towards the interstate. And you kind of see the lay of the land to the right. Little drop-off of Plantation, then kind of gently runs away from Plantation Road. This is looking down. There is this access that's there, this driveway, but obviously this won't be used in their development. That driveway or curb cut will be removed. This is at the corner, looking down into the existing house that's on the property. Again, it kind of drops off and has a gentle slope towards downhill into the rear. This is looking back from that corner back towards Wells Fargo from the intersection of Friendship Lane. This is looking down the driveway at the existing house. This is looking across to the adjacent property. We've gotten comments from the adjacent property owner. So you can see where the existing house is and accessory buildings associated with it. This is just a different angle of that adjacent house. Just kind of looking from the back, kind of diagonally. You can see there's an outbuilding that'll be removed as well as the house will be removed if this is approved and it's constructed. And then lastly, this is looking back up the rear of the property line towards Plantation Road, as well as there's a kind of a ditch, a drainage area to the left of this that drains some of the development across the street. And I think you'll see there's, in the past, have been drainage issues along Friendship Lane. And then this is the rear of the house from the rear property line. Just kind of looking, 2 different views from the driveway. One looking towards the light there at Plantation, so looking west, and then one looking down Friendship Lane to the east as well. The entrance for, one of the entrances for Wells Fargo is further down Friendship, looking east as well. So our ordinance defines a restaurant for a drive-in or fast food restaurant as an establishment primarily engaged in the preparation of food and beverages for either takeout, delivery, or table services served at a counter, drive-up or drive-through service facility, or by curb service. Typical uses include a drive-in fast food restaurant or a coffee shop. Obviously, it's not allowed in R2, so therefore they are requesting to rezone to C2, where it is a use permitted by right. Kind of their concept plan that's in the packet. So the entrance is further down Friendship Lane, but it's a 2,500 square foot building with a drive-through window. They do have stacking for 15 spaces. That's what they're showing. They also have a 500 square foot patio area adjacent to the building, 25 parking spaces. They are proposing underground stormwater management to control any runoff from the site. Have a screen dumpster. There is a sidewalk is shown for both sidewalk on Plantation and Friendship. The projects that we've been working on from the county goes all the way to Gander Way, which is across the way from Friendship Lane. So there is a crosswalk that does come across to this corner of their site, and so they have agreed to install sidewalks. So with all the hotels in that area, that seemed to make the sense so people could actually walk to a restaurant. And also they're proposing a 25-foot sign on Plantation Road. A couple of views of what they're proposing of the building. So the top and bottom are what it would look like from the road, and then the rear of that, and then the two side views of the building as far as the architectural renderings. Existing zoning, so it's zoned R2. To the north, it's C2 and C2C as well. The conditions are on the corner lot across the street. To the east, you have the adjacent house, which is zoned R2. You also have C2 conditional as well. Cross Plantation, it's zoned C2, and then it is C2C to the south. As far as future land use, it's all core. Core is our highest intensity land use for commercial. It parallels essential business districts. They're appropriate for larger scale highway-oriented retail uses and regionally based shopping facilities. So again, this use is consistent with that core designation. Planning Commission held a public hearing on August 2nd. One citizen spoke during that meeting, had concerns about the reduction of the 30-foot buffer, the dumpster location, stormwater runoff, increased traffic, vehicle speeds on Friendship Lane. Planning Commission just talked about the site plan review process, the buffer reduction request, the dumpster location, the traffic impact analysis, the surrounding zoning, core future land use estimation, the previous speed study that was presented by the citizen who spoke. And then also they talked about a possible proffer condition. At the Planning Commission meeting, they didn't have that proffer condition. They still recommended approval of the request. Since then, the applicant has submitted a proffer, which is in your packet. Again, it's dealing with conformance with the concept plan, other than those that may be required during the site plan review process, subject to any changes. So with that, take any questions. The Planning Commission recommends approval. Staff recommends approval as well. And I will answer any questions that you may have.
Any questions from the board?
So there is a proffered condition?
There is.
Is that the one that's in the letter?
Should look like that. It's in your packet, I believe.
I'm looking at it online. I think
Okay.
it's the same one, but it's...
It's kind of blurry at the end of the document, I've noticed, in the online version.
Okay.
Because I was pulling it up as well to print out, but I had an actual copy of the original.
And that's executed by the current real estate owner.
By the owner, correct. That's why it took a little time. We had to get the owner to sign it versus the applicant.
Philip, I believe the board received email indicating that with respect to the traffic study, that VDOT indicated that there's a proposal to develop the property across Friendship
Correct.
Do we know what that is?
A convenience store.
Okay.
So we've had we have a concept plan process where people come in with a concept plan and they'll go and Tarek and his staff will pull all the people to review it. So they have looked at that and that's gone through. That's what VDOT was referring to because they were part of that meeting. Now, VDOT owns the corner piece and of that property, which I believe is they're trying to sell as additional right-of-way. Previously, that property was owned by private entity, and the proffers are actually on that piece of the property across the street. Because at one point in the early 90s, I believe, there was a hotel proposal for a Hampton Inn on that property. So there are conditions that limit the use of the VDOT piece of property. It's VDOT's property and then another piece that's being proposed for this convenience store. So they're going to have to go through a action to remove those proffer conditions at some point in the future.
Well, I know that's not an issue here for us tonight, but I
What-
guess my question would be, with respect to the traffic impact analysis,
Right, so they.
would a lot of the traffic for that other use, the new use, be on Friendship, or would it be coming off Plantation?
There's access off of both, from
Both,
what I
okay.
remember, from what I've seen. So, yeah, the applicant submitted a traffic study to VDOT for them to look at, and Ashley Mathena is here from VDOT, and she's the one who wrote the letter and comment. So they submitted their study, and I'll paraphrase, she can correct me if I'm wrong. I think the two issues that they're looking at are, one, the light at Plantation and Friendship, and the timing of the light, right? When you have new traffic patterns, you may want to look at so there's analysis of that. I believe also it's at the entrance of the proposed use of the quick serve coffee shop is what would be needed there. Is it just a regular entrance? Does it need a taper, or does it need a turn lane? And really, that's what I think the traffic report I think those are the two things they're really looking at. I'll let her, if you want to hear from her directly, you can, but I think those are the two issues. And I think the comments are, since I think this was originally filed, that concept plan meeting had happened, and VDOT wants both of them to take each other's development into consideration as part of their analysis.
Thank you. Any other questions of Mr. Thompson? If not,
The applicant is here.
is there a representative of the
There is.
applicant, and he or she would like to speak? Good evening.
Ladies and gentlemen, good evening. Thank you for your time tonight. My name is Sean Graham with Insight Real Estate. As Mr. Thompson explained, I believe our proposed rezone fits perfectly with the intent of the future land use map. We would be building that public sidewalk along Plantation Road and Friendship Lane that was initially contemplated in the 2014 Plantation Road Improvement Plan. My understanding is that was never constructed due to a lack of funding. So if approved, we would relieve the county of that financial burden. We would be beautifying the parcel by providing landscaping in accordance with the county design handbook. And on top of that, we would provide a option 2 type C buffer, if I'm remembering correctly, along the east property line. That consists namely of a 6-foot high screening fence, large row of deciduous trees, a large row of evergreen shrubs, and a large row of deciduous shrubs, which should provide some pretty significant screening from our neighbor to the east. As far as traffic goes, we did submit that operational and queuing analysis to VDOT back in July. We just got those comments yesterday. The first comment on there is that making us aware of this new development across the street. We are going to need to take into account their traffic and update our report accordingly. Beyond that, I've looked through it. I spoke to my traffic consultant. We didn't see any major showstoppers in there, nothing that caused too much concern. I would also like to address one public comment brought up at the last meeting regarding the some high speeds of traffic along Friendship Lane. I would argue that doesn't totally apply to our project, considering we are at the intersection of Plantation and Friendship Lane. The vast majority of traffic coming into our site is going to turn in off Plantation and pull directly into our site before passing any of our neighboring properties. Lastly, I'd just like to speak to stormwater management, which, as Mr. Thompson mentioned, we're currently contemplating as underground detention. As we move through site design, we're going to make sure we're meeting all county and state requirements to avoid negatively impacting existing drainage conditions. So with that being said, I truly believe this would be a very beneficial development to the county and the Hollins area in the form of a convenient morning stop for a coffee, dozens of local jobs, and significant tax revenue over the lifespan of the lease. So with that being said, I'll turn it back to answer any remaining questions. Thank you.
Any questions?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I have a few questions. The Slade's property is 37 feet from the corner to the property line, and then the dumpster is 15 feet from the property line. I think our code normally says 30 feet from the property line. With that said, how many times per week is that dumpster planning to be emptied at most of your other sites? What's the frequency?
Candidly, I'm not completely familiar with the operations. I would estimate once a week, but I couldn't say that for sure.
Yeah. How about the fence? You said it's 6 foot high, isn't it?
Correct.
Well, if you're going to put the dumpster that close to the fence, maybe you can think about an 8-foot fence so that the visibility is even less as it's closer to the property line. Just something to think about.
Sure.
Got
I
any
would say that.
comment on that?
Yeah, I would say that if you look in the design handbook, that buffer has the 6-foot fence along the property line and then the row of trees on the inside of it. So I would argue that that row of trees would provide a considerable amount of screening from that 8-foot dumpster.
You can have the trees between the fence and the dumpster.
Correct.
They're going to be fast-growing evergreens, something to that effect.
Large deciduous trees is, I believe, what the handbook calls for.
Okay. I don't think I have any more questions at this time, Mr. Chair.
Any other questions? Not? Thank you. We may call you back up.
All right, thank you.
I would like to open the public hearing. I would like to remind the speakers to please give your name and address, speak into the microphones. You have 3 minutes. I have one speaker request form, and that is from Carol Slate. Good evening.
Evening. Okay, my name's Carol Slate, and my brother and I together own the adjoining property at 7531 and 7535 Friendship Lane. And we are not opposed to progress as long as it's done correctly according to Roanoke County's design handbook and doesn't devalue our adjoining property. Since the county has a design handbook, why would a modification reduction to the 30-foot required buffer zone be allowed? And that's in their modification request. In lieu of the ordinance required 30-foot setback, they are requesting a 15-foot setback. And our house is only 37 feet from the property line, and if you allow a 15-foot reduction in the buffer zone, it will be unlivable because of the dumpster site, which will be placed adjacent to our house. And the dumpster can be relocated, and the required 30-foot buffer zone can be achieved if the building size and parking lot are reduced to fit the 9/10 acre lot. We also want to know what type of enclosure will be around the dumpster, and we would like you to consider requiring Insight to put an 8-foot wooden privacy fence instead of a 6-foot screen fence that they propose between the properties with 10-foot Leland cypress trees staggered in 2 rows. And Mr. North, I would also like to know if you visited McDonald's on Plantation and looked at their dumpster site, which is at the back of the building next to the drive-through lane.
Please go ahead with your comments.
And-
We'll have discussion later.
And please do not approve the site plan as it's submitted, as it does not meet the design handbook's requirements and will only devalue the adjoining residential property. And I did bring a tape measure if you want to see how much 37 feet is.
No, I think we're good. Thank you. Do we have any other citizens who would like to speak to this matter? If not, I would close the public hearing. Are there any further questions from any board members?
Yeah, let me
Mr. Radford.
ask Mr. Thompson to come back up here. So what's the, so usually the building has to be 30 feet off of the side setback, right?
Yeah, so let's talk about this. It was submitted with the application. We just, full disclosure, want to give all the information that's submitted. Anytime a C2 zoned property abuts R1 or R2, it's a type C buffer. Type C buffer, there's two options, right? You have one that has the 6-foot fence and one that doesn't. The one that doesn't is usually bigger. It's 40 feet. Without the fence, it's 30 feet with the fence. And then there's plantings that are there. The waiver request is really done at the site plan process, right? Given our topography, given site conditions, it allows the applicant to request a waiver of the zoning administrator during the site plan review process, looking at that 30-foot buffer. Okay? We've met with Ms. Slate in the last week or so and talked about a lot of these things. And some of the comments that have come up, I've relayed to Becky about maybe some considerations, right? And the purpose for that is because not every site is nice and level, right? You need to have an ability to make alterations if you need to. So some of the things that could be looked at, and I shared this with Rebecca James, our zoning administrator, is, okay, what is the enclosure? Typically, most enclosures are some type of brick or masonry around it, so that would probably help. Potentially a taller fence, potentially taller plantings. So it has the effect of what the original buffer is trying to do. What I will say is on their original plat or schematic they show a 15-foot distance, and that was based off of, I think, our GIS system. They had done a revised plan. We didn't want to confuse the issue, so we just left it alone, but that was actually a survey of the property, and it changes to 19 feet. Instead of 15, it's a 19-foot, it's from the property line to the enclosure is 19 feet. But the intent of the waiver modification is to give some flexibility and, in essence, give the zoning administrator the ability to make those changes while always still meeting the intent of the ordinance. So the intent is to screen, right, to buffer, to do that in that process. So I think all those things would come, maybe instead of deciduous trees, it's evergreen trees. Maybe it's taller evergreen trees that are planted. Maybe it's a taller fence that's planted, and then the enclosure is masonry, right? Enclosure versus a fence of some sort. Those are all things that will be taken care of the site plan process. But again, I relayed those concerns to Mrs. James for her consideration. When it gets to that point, that's where it comes in the process, is through the site plan process, not you all approving it.
So what I'm seeing on the plan here is a 6-foot high fence, a row of trees, and then the dumpster is enclosed. So that's like 3 layers
Yeah.
before he even gets to the dumpster, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And most of our dumpster enclosures are as tall as the dumpster or higher, so you
Right.
don't ever see the dumpster. And I'd assume they know how to do that.
Right, and again, I think that's going to be part of, this is the zoning piece of it, then you have to submit a site plan, you go through all the agency comments, and that's why that subject to the proffer, anytime we have a proffer with conformance with the plan, we always put that last thing, subject to any changes required during the site plan review process. So, there might be changes in that buffer that are done, like it is a masonry enclosure.
Right.
There are taller trees now. Yeah, do we have a general standard of what a type C buffer looks like? Sure. But we also have the ability to make changes to that or request changes to that as part of that process. So that's really the, obviously, if they're encroaching, we need to make it, and again, it may not be for the entire buffer, it might just be right in that one concentrated area where the encroachment is taking place, right? But it has the same effect of what the intent of the ordinance is. And that's what the zoning administrator will be looking at.
Okay,
So,
thank you.
Mr. North?
No further questions.
So, Mr. Thompson, what would you anticipate occurring if the zoning administrator declined to make a modification?
that's what they will have to work on.
Then they'd have to move it back 30 feet.
Well, the question is, we had this conversation, really, if you look at the only place on site, somewhere off of the drive-through aisle, there might be some in, if it's only being emptied once or twice a week, is that inconvenience? Yeah, who knows? And part of it, and the answer they gave is, one, the types of, I'll speak for the applicant, just because the answer he gave at the planning commission, most of a coffee shop is paper products going into the dumpster. The other thing is, they did a turn radius analysis of, what would empty that dumpster, and so that also gets a little tricky of why they kind of located it where they did. So they come in, turn into it, empty it, turn out, and go right back out the entrance. So they did provide that clarification during the planning commission meeting.
Mr. Chairman,
Okay.
has there been any mention from the petitioner of what the enclosure for the dumpster is?
What
Like
type,
what kind of material? We keep saying it's typically brick or masonry, but have we heard that from the
have you
petitioner?
designed the enclosure yet?
Yeah, it'll be 8-foot high masonry.
Okay, thank you.
So,
Thank you. Oh, go ahead.
I'd like to ask VDOT a question, if they can.
okay, for Ashley?
Good evening.
Good evening, welcome. I know that this rezoning is what we have before us tonight. I know that the zoning administrator has to consider what we just talked about, and I know VDOT has to once the rezoning is accomplished, or when it's accomplished. Having heard that there's going to be another site for development across the street from this one, and coupled with the fact that traffic would be increased, do you see a turn lane into the coffee shop being something to be considered in view of safety concerns?
Yeah, it's certainly something that we're looking at and can be addressed during the site plan review as well. It won't change the operation necessarily of the entire intersection. The traffic on Friendship itself isn't very high, so it'd be, most of the people are turning into this development or potentially the other development if it were to go through as well. So it's not necessarily included in the traffic analysis that was done, but it's something that can be addressed at the site plan review.
And the reason I ask that out of abundant caution for safety is because at peak times in the morning when people are going to work, and especially going down Friendship towards Wells Fargo's parking lot area there, that it could get problematic. People that aren't stopping for a cup of coffee, and someone that is, it could be some rear ends.
Absolutely, the anticipation of the car in front of you.
Sure.
Yeah,
And so that's why I asked the question. That's all I have. Thank you very much.
absolutely.
Anybody else?
So what's the pleasure of the board?
Well, Mr. Chairman, I believe that the rezoning is something we need to consider and rely on the zoning administrator's review after that process with respect to the site plan, the dumpster, the fence, the buffers. The speed study that we've had included in the packages within the tolerance level. VDOT has written a letter addressing concerns on the 2018 traffic data, which is more current than what was used before 2010. So, and they've also spoken to the possibility of a turn lane. With that said, I think that the proposed zoning request is consistent with the purpose and intent of the county's adopted comprehensive plan and good zoning practice and will not result in substantial detriment to the community. I therefore move we approve the rezoning request that has been requested.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Oh, Mr.
One
Thompson.
clarification, just for the record. That's with the proffered condition, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. Madam Clerk?
Mr. Peters?
Yes.
Mrs. Hooker?
Yes.
Mr. North?
Yes.
Mr. Radford?
Yes.
Mr. Mahoney?
Yes. Item P on our list, on our agenda is citizen comments, citizen comments and communications. I have none. Item Q, reports and inquiries of board members. First one up, Ms. Hooker.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just have a couple of things to mention. It's been a busy couple of weeks, and I'll make it brief, but school has started. Best wishes for a good school year to Dr. Nicely and all our faculty, staff, and students. Friday night football is beginning this Friday night, so that's exciting. We have a great school system. We take a lot of pride in what they do. Went to the Catawba Farmers Market for the Farm to Table dinner for a fundraiser for the market, and it was a delicious meal to help support the market. And on that note, please remember the Catawba Farmers Market. It's a wonderful opportunity to buy fresh vegetables, fruits, meats, crafts are there. They are open on Thursdays from 3 to 6:30 p.m. and will remain open until October 20th. Looking forward to Cherokee Hills Neighborhood Association ribbon cutting for their new picnic shelter, courtesy of the Girl Scout Troop 453. Really looking forward to that and appreciate what they've done for the community. And then just one last quick note regarding the VACO meeting that I attended along with Chairman Mahoney, Mr. North, Mr. Kaywood, Mr. Lubeck, Ms. Sefcek. We had a great meeting, had a lot of good discussion. I attended the Education Committee and had some great discussion regarding capital funding and other pressing issues. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Mr. North.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. On August 13th, I attended the ribbon cutting for the Williamson, which is a new initiative of the Greater Williamson Road Area Business Association, located in the Williamson Road Plaza. The Williamson provides private offices, desks, hotels, and conference room rental. And the facility was made possible through a 2022 Virginia Statewide Business District Resurgence Grant, which our Economic Development Department was in support of and wrote a letter to that effect. On August 15th, attended the Virginia County Summer Session here in Roanoke. As a member of the Economic Development Committee, advocated for the streamlining of broadband contracts between state and localities to implement the many approved projects, as this seems to be a recurring theme around the Commonwealth. Also, as chair of the Transportation Committee, we supported the addition of funding for southbound exit 129 to 137 of the I-81 for a third lane, as well as additional state and federal funding for airport expansions around the state to foster economic development. On August 16th, we listened to the governor's speech before the money committees of the General Assembly, and we all probably heard by now that there's a year-end state surplus of $1.9 billion, coupled with unspent appropriations as of June 30th of $1.2 billion. And this has many possibilities, and some that were named were $1 billion in tax rebates, $905 million addition to the rainy day reserve fund, $585 million capital projects to supplement VRS economic development and the I-64 expansion. $400 million in additional tax relief. Emphasis was stated by the governor on 3 targets: the $400 million tax relief, lowering the cost of doing business in Virginia by reducing regulations like many of our neighboring bordering states such as North Carolina, and funding more money for talent and workforce development. And on one final note, Secretary Cummings made reference to the rainy day state funds, that they'll be $4.3 billion by 2024. And according to the Secretary, this means that the fund will exceed the 15% of the general funds and budget language and will need to be added, or I should say amended, to exceed the 15%. And there's one area legislator who served on this board stated in a text the other day was, when I asked about the $1.2 billion, he indicated we're going to give it back to the taxpayers. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Mr. Radford.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to report on, I met with the Back Creek Civic League actually last night. This is a very active civic league in Windsor Hills District. They had not met since COVID, so it was great to see everybody back at the Back Creek Fire and Rescue. While we were there, they gave us an opportunity to talk to the citizens. There were probably a dozen of them there. Fire and Rescue got up and spoke. Police Department, Chief Hall was there. Representative from the Sheriff's Office was there. Richard was there and introduced his staff that was available in there. And he talked the less of everybody, I just want y'all to know.
Don't believe it. Don't believe it.
Yeah, I couldn't believe it. And then the volunteer fire chief got up and spoke to us at the end, along with a representative from LOA, the local area of aging. But anyway, he made a pitch for this coming weekend. They're going to have their pork barbecue dinner fundraiser. If you're interested in the area, it goes from 4 to 7 on Saturday. You'll have to buy a ticket in advance because they're going to run out of barbecue if you're interested. So that's the happenings in the Back Creek area. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Mr. Peters.
Nothing tonight, sir.
Thank you. 2 items. Both Ms. Hooker and Mr. North mentioned our attendance and staff's attendance at the VACO meeting last week. It was very enjoyable to have the VACO folks here in Roanoke. I think we did a lot of good business and geared up for the annual meeting in November, trying to establish the county's legislative program for the General Assembly. I attended the finance and general government sessions. It's interesting, as Mr. North points out, there's all this money and everybody has great ideas how to spend other people's money. And it's always fun to spend other people's money. So we'll see how that plays out. The second item is this morning I attended a celebration at Virginia Western Community College. They were honoring Ed Hall and his family. They were naming the business science building for the Hall family. And if any of you know Ed Hall, he is a leader in the Roanoke region and the Roanoke Valley. He and his family are looking at a multi-million-dollar, multi-generational endowment fund for Virginia Western, and it was very impressive. And there was a lot of people there who were honoring Ed Hall. Mm-hmm. And so I want to mention that to everyone because it was a very nice celebration, and it's very impressive what the foundation, the Virginia Western Foundation Endowment Fund is doing, and what Dr. Sandel is doing at Virginia Western. And I know we as a county have supported that CCAP program in terms of providing funding for students in Roanoke County, help pay the tuitions for that program. Mm-hmm. And they're doing good things at Virginia Western. With that, there has been a suggestion that we change our meeting date from September 27 to Wednesday, September 28. Has staff had an opportunity to mull that proposal over and give us any comments before the board actually votes on changing the meeting date?
We can make it work.
We can make it work. So with that, I would seek a motion to amend and change our meeting date from Tuesday, September 27, to Wednesday, September 28.
And I'll second that.
Do we need a roll call vote?
I'm sorry, did you make the motion
I
to?
thought he was making
I made the motion.
You made the motion,
Martha
And I
seconded.
seconded.
and it's time for me to call the roll. Mr. Peters?
Yes.
Mrs. Hooker?
Yes.
Mr. Norworth?
Yes.
Mr. Radford?
Yes.
Mr. Mahoney?
Yes. Now, the second aspect of that is earlier this afternoon, under section F1, F1 was a request for public hearing and first reading of rezoning ordinances, and we scheduled the public hearing for the A. Boone Real Estate, Inc. Rezoning out at down on Edgebrook Road, and we set that public hearing for Tuesday, September 27th. So I would ask for a resolution or a motion from the board to change that action, the F1 action that we did this afternoon, and schedule that public hearing for Wednesday, September 28th.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Second.
Okay, I made the motion, Martha made the second.
Mr. Peters?
Yes.
Sorry. Mrs. Hooker?
Yes.
Mr. Norworth?
Yes.
Mr. Radford?
Yes.
Mr. Mahoney?
Yes. Do we have any other business to transact, or can we adjourn?